they were being so kind of nice. I said until I get started.
Alright guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. Before I introduce our guest, if you are here for Urban Studies and you have an orange sheet, I will stamp those at the end, okay? Also, if you're here and you want to get in on the raffle, we have 2 of them going. I'll give you a ticket. I need your ID number on the back of the ticket, and you're going to keep the one that actually says keep this, okay? And we have 2 raffles. One is for a copy of his comic book, and another is kind of one that I think I'm going to steal and make it my name, is to get your name on a tombstone in his next book, which is totally cool. So, only one raffle ticket will get you entered into both, all right? So, comic book creator Scott Larson is a graduate of Loyola University and the American Academy of Art. His side job is advertising, but his true love is drawing comics. He has drawn for many different companies, Capstone Press, Comics and Moonstone Books, among many others. Visitations, his current comic book series, is a gothic action-adventure horror story set in Chicago at the Steampunk turn of the century. Please give a Glenbrook welcome to Scott Larson.
Before we get started, I wanted to show you a little animation thing we did for the book that I put out. The book that I'm working on is called Visitations. It is a graphic novel or a comic book. It's a history of Chicago as seen through the eyes of the residents of the city's oldest cemetery. So the plan is to show the growth of the city from the turn of the century, basically the present day, or however long I live. I don't know which one will come first. And this is the trailer that I put together for it. Only some of the stuff you see in there really happened. So, so I've been working in the comic book industry for about a decade. I grew up in Chicago, and I grew up on the north side of Chicago, and I always wanted to do comic books ever since I was a little kid. And so, about a little over a decade ago, I got into the business, and I started it with the history book about Marie Curie, who was a scientist who had created or found radioactivity. I also did a book about King Kong, The Saint, which used to be an old radio show, followed by an old TV show, followed by multiple movies and different stories and things of that nature, and 1,000 Ways to Die, which was a TV show on the Spike Network. And I was looking to do something new, and I didn't quite know what I was going to do. And so I was at work one day, and I wasn't paying attention to what I was supposed to be doing, and instead I decided that it was boring, and so I was just going to troll through the internet. And I started doing a Google search on family members' names. One of the names I put into the Google search was of my grandfather, and he had died 40 years before I did this Google search. And he was kind of an unknown. Nobody knew who he was. So I did a Google search on him, and this gigantic thread popped up. And I was like, what is this? This is really strange. And it turns out that the relatives from Sweden were trying to find out what happened to the people who came over here as immigrants. And so I ended up getting all this information about my family that I had never known about before. This town in Sweden where they come from, the year they came to Chicago. They came to Chicago in 1869. In 1871, the fire hit Chicago, and they were actually involved in the Great Chicago Fire. The fire swept through the city, and they ended up going into Lake Michigan. My great-great-grandmother was pregnant with my great-grandfather, and he was born about a month after the fire. And so there's all this really, really interesting information. One of the pieces of information I discovered was I found out where my relatives were buried. They're buried in a place called Graceland Cemetery. Has anyone ever heard of Graceland Cemetery? Has anyone ever heard of Wrigley Field? Graceland Cemetery is about a 10-minute walk down Clark Street from Wrigley Field. And I decided that I was going to go over and I was going to take a look at the grave sites out of curiosity if nothing else. And when I walked in, the first thing I saw was that. And it was very strange. I was really taken aback when I saw that. And it was kind of like, anyone ever heard of the Spectre from DC Comics? The Spectre is a ghost character who basically looks like death, and he looks like that. And so that was really interesting. And then there are some other interesting graves like that one. And this mausoleum thing belonged to Potter Palmer. Potter Palmer was one of the city founders, and Graceland Cemetery is the home of most of the founders of the city of Chicago. And so I thought it was really interesting. And I started looking at what a lot of these people did. What did they do in the city? How did the city rebuild itself after the fire? And in the meantime, I realized that my ancestors didn't have any gravestones. So I went to a place called Gast Monuments. And Gast has been in the city of Chicago for over 100 years. They built their company probably around the same time as the fire back in the 1860s. And so they were really nice. They said, yes, we can help you out. We'll do it for this much, blah, 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 blah. And I became friends with the lady there on Facebook. And so, I opened up my Facebook, I looked at the newsfeed. She was posting all this real morbid stuff. One of the things she posted was, how to bury yourself naked and then sprout into a tree after you die. And it was like, okay, that's really grotesque, but I guess it's good for the environment. And she did this article, which was the 13th creepiest gravestones in the world, or monuments. And it was just like, God, that's really morbid. And I read the article and I went to bed, and then the next day I woke up and the first issue of Visitations was in my head. And a lot of the characters, this is the grave of Marshall Field. He's a resident over at Graceland Cemetery as well. The characters that I have for my story are here. You saw them in the trailer. And they're based on different monuments, specifically from that article that Katie Gast had posted on Facebook. This is an angel of death, and I combined it with a model friend of mine and kind of came up with this winged skull with a horse. These are both monuments in Graceland Cemetery. The boy is a fairly recent monument. He was created in 2007. She's much older, and there's actually a story behind her, which I will mention in a couple minutes. This is some saint who died in 1350, and when he died, his head has kind of been passed around from people to people, and it's apparently a cursed object. And I again have thrown the statue of death in there. And this grave was really interesting because all it said was, it gave the name, and it was the victim of the beast 666. And I wondered what that would look like. So I have a bunch of goth friends on Twitter, and I was like, hey, send me pictures of what you find scary. And they sent me some truly frightening images. I had to kind of pull back a little bit. But I came up with that, and also I was doing this thing with sculpture where you take a skeleton and you sculpture the muscles of the body onto the skeleton. It's called crochet. I was doing it around the same time, and I thought that was kind of a cool look. And so I kind of put those together and came up with what I thought the Beast 666 would look like. The character, who's actually the main character in the story and based on my brother-in-law, is based on a tomb of somebody breaking out of their tomb, which I don't know why anyone would carve that in a So I did the book. I drew the book. I wrote the book. I drew the book. I published the book, and I've been going to different comic book conventions throughout the city. There's a comic book convention at McCormick Place called C2E2, and that takes place in March, and I was there. And I went to Wizard World a couple months ago, and I was lucky enough to be invited to the Chicago Ghost Convention a couple weeks ago. And what I'm finding as I'm going to these places is everybody's got a story. And I was at C2E2, and people would walk by the table, and I would say, "Hey, have you ever heard of Graceland Cemetery?" You know, and some people would say yes, some people would say no, some people would talk about the little girl statue. As one lady was walking by, I said, "Have you ever heard of Graceland Cemetery?" She said, "Yeah, my friends and I used to break in there all the time to get drunk," which I don't recommend, by the way. And I said, "Well, that's really interesting. Did you ever see anything when you were in there?" And she said, "Nah." And I said, "I'm sorry, did you ever see anything when you were in there?" "Oh, we were drunk." And I said, "Well, what did you see?" She said, "I saw a man in a newsboy cap floating towards us." And I said, "Did your friends see this?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, that was really interesting. There's another cemetery that's kind of a sister cemetery to Graceland, and it's called Rose Hill, and a lot of the city's founders are buried there as well." And I said to her, "Did you ever go to Rose Hill Cemetery?" She goes, "Oh yeah, we used to break in there all the time and get drunk too." And I said to her, "Did you ever see the woman in the Victorian clothes with the baby carriage?" Now I asked this question because a friend of mine had told me we were driving by Rose Hill Cemetery, and he said, "My sister and I were in here. We saw this woman in like old clothes and an old time baby carriage, and we went over to talk to her, and she disappeared." And so I asked this girl that, and she said, "Yes, we saw her." The interesting thing about that story is I've been doing all kinds of different research on Chicago cemeteries and haunted places in Chicago, and that's not anywhere. The woman with the Victorian clothes and the baby carriage has not shown up on the internet that I have found so far. When I was at the Chicago Ghost Convention a couple weeks ago, I made friends with ghost hunters, which I didn't realize they were real before now, but they actually like go into places and they have sound testing equipment, and then they listen to the recordings later on. They're showing all this stuff. It was interesting, but I have yet to talk to them about the woman in the Victorian clothes. But I'm really curious. So you know, certainly there are different cemeteries in the city. There are a ton of different cemeteries. There's different cemeteries here. There's cemeteries all over the country. In fact, the entire world, if you think about it, is a cemetery one way or another, if you go far enough back in time. So I want to go back to Graceland Cemetery and go back to the Statue of Death. And it's called Eternal Silence. And there's a number of things about the statue which are interesting. The first thing is the statue started out black. You can see how there's black in the face here and there's black over here. The entire statue looked like that, and it was just kind of worn away by the elements. So as creepy as it might look now, just imagine it all black. When I was there, it was right around this time of the year, and it was kind of creepy, and you know there were leaves on the ground, chill in the air, and it was very Halloweeny. And my wife and I walked over to it, and we looked down by the feet, and there are coins by the feet. And so the legend is, and I don't know, I didn't realize it was a legend with this particular statue, but there's the there's the ferryman, there's the you die, and then you pay a toll to somebody who takes you across like the river Styx. It goes back to ancient Greece, and I guess that's what people were doing there. There was also like someone had graffitied it too, which I would hate to see what the carpentry would do to them. But and the other thing about the statue and the legend is if you look into his face, you see a vision of your own death. I don't know if that's true or not. I wasn't brave enough to look, but that is one of the stories that's associated with the statue in particular. Also, this statue wasn't supposed to be photographed, but clearly that's not the case. And then the little girl who's actually a character in there, her name is Inza Clark. And there's a couple of really interesting stories about Inza Clark. Inza Clark was a seven-year-old little girl who died at the turn of the century. Her parents were very bereaved, and so they had the statue built over. Now, it's under glass because they're trying to protect it from the elements. You know, it rains, it snows, and things destroy these statues. And in fact, Rose Hill Cemetery that I mentioned a little bit ago, and we're going to go back to, has a monument very much like this, only the face is kind of worn away, and it's just been completely destroyed by the elements. So, apparently what happens with the Clark is when it rains, she disappears from the case. And people can hear crying throughout the cemetery. There are numerous reports of her just being gone from the case. In fact, at the Chicago Ghost Convention, I had talked to somebody who knew the security guard who went over to the case and found her missing. And then she just mysteriously reappears. There are numerous reports of people seeing a little girl frolicking along the cemetery in those clothes. And it's a very strange story. The weirdest part of the story, though, is that Itza Clark is actually buried there. There is the name of the person who is buried there is a different name than hers. Look Wolf is another really interesting tale of Graceland Cemetery. Apparently, people have reported seeing a dog parading in front of the monument here. Now, he was just an architect. There was really nothing special about him, with the exception of his tomb being kind of like buried into this hill. But the dog apparently has green glowing eyes, and people can walk by there and hear barking all the time. There's howling at the moon, that kind of stuff. And so I want to go back to Rose Hill Cemetery. You didn't see pictures of that before. This is a mausoleum that has a lot of different famous people there. They're stored in there. They're not really buried. They're stored in there. And one of the people who was there is Richard Warren Sears. Richard Warren Sears is one of the creators of the Sears department store, which, has anyone heard of Sears? Okay. Sears is actually on its way out, which is why I asked that question. I think there's only like 2 of them left in the city. But it was a very big department store. They used to have catalogs that were sent around the country. People would order from the catalogs, and that went on through the 1950s and 60s. And the ghost of Richard Warren Sears has been seen walking through here wearing a top hat and tails. He doesn't bother anybody from what I understand, but he's kind of hanging out. This is the grave of someone named Charles Hopkinson. And it was one of those tortured stories. He had a tortured story where he was trying to get this mausoleum built for family members or something. It wasn't working out, and then it did finally get built, and he died. But people walking past here on the anniversary of his death can hear moaning and chains rattling. So it's very. What's the name of the Charles Dickens story? It's not a Christmas story. It's Christmas Carol. Mm-hmm. It's very Christmas Carol. And then this is Frances Pierce. Frances Pierce is a woman who died, and then her infant died 4 months later, and her husband had this built for them. And apparently, again, it's underneath the glass to make sure that the elements don't destroy the statue. But on the anniversary of her death, the glass here fills up with a white mist. I want to move a lot further south now. The Little Book Ballroom is on Archer Avenue. Archer Avenue is one of the most haunted places in Chicago, and that's where the Ghost Conference was, which is where this picture came from. But the most famous ghost in Chicago, her story originated at the Little Book Ballroom. Has anyone ever heard of Resurrection Mary? Resurrection Mary was, nobody knows who she was for sure. There's 2 possibilities. The first one is this person who was killed, it was around the 1920s or 30s. She was killed in a car crash. Her name was Anna Norcus. And there's this person who also was killed in a car crash, and her name was Mary Cleverland. And what happens with Resurrection Mary, why she's so famous, is she is a hitchhiker ghost. And so what has happened is the story of her started back at the Wilbur Ballroom. And somebody was there for a dance. There's all kinds of like dances and stuff that's still on there. Someone was there for a dance, and he met this girl, and they were dancing, and she was very cold to the touch. And after the dance, he decided to drive her home, and she gave him the address, and he would ask her questions, and all she kept saying was, "I want to go home. I want to go home. Go down Archer Avenue. Go down Archer Avenue." So he went down Archer Avenue, and they went past Resurrection Cemetery. She disappeared. And that story has happened over and over and over and over and over and over and over, to where people are actually looking for her now. I guess there are some teenagers who decide to like put on glowy paint and like walk down Archer Avenue to freak people out. And if it was just that, it could probably be dismissed as just a ghost story. But there are also reports of Mary being seen behind the bars of Resurrection Cemetery. And what she does is she holds the bars. And this is what the bars look like. These bars have been replaced over and over and over. And with each apparition, they keep ending up like that. The other thing with Archer Avenue is it is a place of a lot of different mysterious things. One of the things is these ghost lights. Has anyone ever heard of ghost lights before? Ghost lights are apparently these orbs, and they're supposed to be, seen around haunted areas. I had never heard of them until a couple weeks ago, but they're supposed to look like that. And they've been seen all up and down Archer Avenue. The other thing is there is a phantom hearse with horses that goes right into Resurrection Cemetery. In the back of the hearse is the body of a child, or a dead child, or a ghost child. I don't know, but that's been seen by numerous people over the years. And then there's Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. Has anyone ever heard of Bachelor's Grove? Up to a couple months ago, I hadn't heard of it either. But it is supposedly the most haunted place in Illinois. There have been numerous sightings there. A lot of the ghost lights. Somebody has seen a two-headed ghost, and somebody else has seen like this farmer who had died along with his horse when they were like doing this plow thing. There's tons of screams. There's all kinds of, you name it, it's happening there. And most of it happens around, there's like a bog. So most of it happens like around the water. I don't know why that is. The other story about Bachelor's Grove is there is this farmhouse. And they think this is what it was. But there's this farmhouse that people see, this phantom farmhouse. And the closer you get to it, it kind of like shrinks or it disappears. No one has been able to find it, even though everybody's seen it. And it kind of appears and disappears at will. And then the last reporting cited, the most concrete piece of evidence of Bachelor's Grove is this. This was taken, and it ran in the Chicago Sun-Times. The photographer who took it, when he talked about it, there was nobody sitting there. So that is a photograph of an apparition, or so it's claimed. And then, so that's the cemeteries, but the cemeteries aren't the only haunted parts of Chicago. This is a garage on Clark Street. And it again isn't too far away from Wrigley Field. And it's over in Lakeview. And something very special happened in this garage. Has anyone ever heard of Al Capone? Bugs Moran? Al Capone was the leader of the South Side gangs, and it wasn't like the gangs now. They were like actually like gangsters, and they had they had like the fedoras and the suits and everything else. Bugs Moran was the head of the North Side gang, the North Side Irish gang, and it's actually the rivalry between them is it's mirrored in the rivalry between the Cubs and the Sox. It's a real thing. It's kind of gone down from this era. So Al Capone had decided he had enough of Bugs Moran, decided that he was going to kill him once and for all. So on Valentine's Day in 1929, he sent a group of his men dressed as police officers in. Bugs Moran was supposed to be in this garage, and they killed everybody in there. He actually missed Bugs Moran. Bugs Moran ended up dying years after Capone did. But so he wasn't there, but his men were there. And there are a couple of different stories that have come out of this. The first one is one of the victims supposedly haunted Al Capone until the day Capone died. And the thing that's kind of interesting about that is there's all these people coming out now saying that Capone wasn't the person who was in charge of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and that the ghost mistakenly haunted him. But the building itself was like this huge attraction. People would walk by it all the time. And the city of Chicago finally had enough, and they tore it down. That's what happens in the city of Chicago when they have had enough of like a building or some historical thing. They just tear the whole place down. And so people have walked by this empty lot where the garage used to be, and they hear machine gun fire and screams. There is also bricks from the St. Valentine's Day Massacre that have been spread out all over the place, and these bricks are supposedly cursed. And so people who own the bricks end up like dying and having bad things happen to them. The Drake Hotel is in downtown Chicago. Has anyone ever heard of it?
I've stayed there.
You stayed there. What floor did you stay on?
It was my grandma's birthday.
Okay. What floor was it?
Oh, we just like me, her, and my mom just went down there.
Oh, okay. I actually had my honeymoon here when I got married a couple of years ago, and the Drake Hotel has the infamous hauntings of the woman in red and the woman in black. And the woman in red committed suicide on the day that the Drake opened. The woman in black was actually a murderer of somebody else who killed someone there in 1944. There's a picture of the Drake Hotel. The Water Tower downtown Chicago is the site of, it's one of the only buildings that survived the fire. I'm going to wrap this up here. But the fire came through and swept through the city, and the guy who was manning the water tower thought that the fire was going to kill him, and so he went up into the tower and he hung himself. And there are reports of him being seen, even now, hanging up there. The police go in there, there's no one there. And that's some of the haunted history of Chicago. Are there any questions?